The burn came first. I remember the exact second the stainless steel bowl left Marlene Whitmore's hand. The rice was still bubbling from the chafing dish. Saffron yellow and fragrant, the way the country club chef knew the Whitmores liked it. The grains struck my face like hot gravel. Steam rose between us, carrying cumin and fury. One kernel lodged under the rim of my glasses and seared the tender skin there. I didn't scream. I had already decided, weeks earlier, that I would not give them the satisfaction of my scream today. Marlene's lips curled back from perfect veneers. "There," she hissed, loud enough for the string quartet to falter on a Mozart minuet. "Maybe that'll teach you to keep your mouth shut. You dried up old Bible thumper." 200 faces turned. Crystal champagne flutes froze halfway to Botoxed lips. My son, my only child, stood at the head table in his midnight blue tuxedo. The one that cost more than my first car. Brandon's eyes flicked from Marlene to me and back again. Calculating. Always calculating. He lifted one eyebrow the way he did when a deal was about to go south and he still thought he could flip it. He did nothing. Said nothing. Just let his mother stand there with second-degree burns forming under arborio rice. That was the moment I knew I would finish what I started. Even if it meant losing him forever. You see, I'm Ruth Ann Callahan, 74 years old, owner of Ruth's Notions and Fabric on East 3rd Street in Dayton, Ohio. Widow of Daniel Callahan, who went into the mill one Tuesday in 1982 and never walked out again. I have buried a husband, raised a son alone, and kept every promise I ever made to God except one. I promised I would never hate my own child. Today I am breaking that promise. And I am going to do it slowly, deliberately, in front of the entire Cincinnati elite who paid $400 a plate to watch my heart shatter and reform into something harder than steel. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to feel the weight of every stitch I sewed to get here. Let me take you back. Only a few months. But it feels like 40 years. It started with a phone call on a February afternoon so cold the windows in my shop frosted from the inside. I was cutting midnight blue silk dupioni for a prom dress when the bell above the door jingled and Brandon walked in wearing a camel hair topcoat and that new smile he'd bought along with his corner office. "Mother," he said. "Never mama anymore. Always mother." Like I was a board member instead of the woman who once walked the floor with him at 3 a.m. when he had colic. "I'm getting married." He said it the way he used to announce straight A's. Proud, expectant, waiting for applause. I set down my shears. "Who is she?" Quote, "Lauren Whitmore. You'll love her. Old money. Hyde Park. The whole package." He flashed the ring box. Tiffany blue leather. Platinum setting big enough to be seen from the International Space Station. "We're thinking May. Maybe April. Her grandmother's will has this funny little clause." Quote, he laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. I knew, right then, that something was wrong. Mothers know. It's a different kind of knowing. Cellular. Ancient. The way birds feel storms in their hollow bones. Lauren came to the shop the following Saturday. She was smaller than I expected. Delicate wrists. Auburn hair twisted up with a pencil while she browsed the lace. She had her grandmother's eyes. Eleanor Whitmore, God rest her, who used to buy linen thread from me by the spool because she said my hands reminded her of her own mother's. Lauren held up a piece of Alencon lace and asked, voice trembling just a little, "Do you think this is too old-fashioned for a wedding gown?" Quote, "Nothing beautiful is ever old-fashioned, honey," I told her. She smiled then, and I saw the girl who used to spend summers at the lake house with a grandmother who braided her hair and told her she was enough. I liked her. I truly did. That was my first mistake. Liking her. The second was underestimating how far greed can stretch a soul until it snaps. Brandon started staying in Cincinnati weeknights because of the commute. He bought a condo on the river with vaulted ceilings and a wine fridge that cost more than my entire inventory. He gave me a key for emergencies and a hug that felt like a receipt. I used the key exactly once. It was a Tuesday in March. Sleeting so hard the wipers on my old Buick couldn't keep up. I baked molasses cookies. The ones with the cracked tops he swore he hated but ate 6 of when he thought I wasn't looking. And drove down I-75 with a heart full of mother love and a tin full of crumbs. The concierge knew me by then. Waved me up. The door was unlocked. Music playing low. Some singer I didn't know whining about money and sex. I smelled white diamonds before I saw her. Marlene Whitmore was sprawled across my son's Italian leather sofa in a silk robe the color of arterial blood. One leg draped over Brandon's lap. He was in shirt sleeves. Tie loosened. Laptop balanced on the coffee table. They were laughing. On the screen, a scanned copy of Eleanor Whitmore's last will and testament. Not the public one. The real one. The one that said if Lauren died after the marriage took place. But before her 35th birthday. Every dime. The lake house. The trusts. The mineral rights in Kentucky. Everything went straight to her surviving spouse. No contest, no probate delay. Marlene traced a crimson nail across the paragraph. All we need is 6 years. Darling. Maybe less if she has an accident sooner. People drown in that lake all the time. Or fall down those gorgeous oak stairs. Tragic. Brandon's voice was soft. Almost tender. We take out the insurance now. Double indemnity. Looks normal. Newlyweds planning ahead. My tin of cookies hit the hardwood with a clang that finally made them look up. Brandon stood so fast he overturned a glass of Merlot. It spread across the pale rug like blood. Mother. Quote. Marlene didn't bother closing her robe. She smiled the way a cat smiles at a canary with a broken wing. Ruth. Perfect timing. We were just discussing family assets. I looked at my son. 34 years old. The cowlick I used to kiss every morning still there at the crown of his head. He met my eyes for 1 second. Then looked away. Something inside me folded in on itself. Quiet and final, like a letter pushed into an envelope that will never be mailed. I turned and walked out. The cookies stayed on the floor. That night I sat in my sewing room until the sky turned the color of ash. I rocked in the old oak rocker Daniel built the year Brandon was born, and I prayed the way my own mother taught me, out loud, hands open on my knees. Lord. What do you do when your child chooses to become a stranger who would kill for money? The answer didn't come in words. It came in the form of a decision so fierce it felt like a second heartbeat. I would stop the wedding. And if I couldn't stop the wedding, I would make sure Lauren never spent one night under the same roof as the two of them without knowing exactly what they were. But Marlene and Brandon were clever. They moved the date up. Twice. First to May, then to April 27th. Claiming Lauren's aunt in Naples was dying and wanted to see her niece as a bride. They booked the Hyde Park Country Club. They hired a wedding planner who charged more per hour than I made in a day. Invitations went out on paper so thick you could barely fold it. I tried everything. I invited Lauren to tea at my house. Just the two of us. I laid the photographs I'd printed. Grainy stills from the probate file. The insurance applications. On my dining table next to the good china. She cried. She shook. But then she whispered. Brandon says you've been confused lately. Forgets things. That maybe the store is too much for you now. I saw the terror underneath her doubt. She wanted the fairy tale so badly she was willing to swallow the poison with the sugar. So I started gathering proof the way my mother gathered blackberries. Slow, deliberate, fingers stained purple by the time the pail was full. I learned how to make a fake Facebook profile. I became Ruthie from St. Anne's Altar Society and friended every girl who worked for Marlene. I bought lattes and listened to stories about cash-stuffed igloo coolers driven to Columbus. About tanning beds that never tanned anybody. About Doug Whitmore crying in the back room because the Columbos wanted their money and he'd lost it all at the casino in Rising Sun. I wore my navy Sunday suit and sweet-talked a probate clerk into letting me see the sealed envelope. I photographed every page with the little flip phone Brandon bought me for Christmas. The one he said was senior-friendly. I sat in my cold car night after night outside the Whitmore McMansion and recorded them on my phone. Marlene laughing about pushing Lauren down the stairs. Brandon asking if roofies left traces in lake water. I kept everything on a tiny black flash drive I hid inside the hollowed-out base of the porcelain Virgin Mary on my dresser. Every night I added another thorn to the crown I was building. And every night I cried myself to sleep wondering how the boy who once cried when we found a dead sparrow in the yard had learned to speak about murder the way other people speak about brunch. The wedding day arrived like a storm you've watched on the radar for weeks. Slow, inevitable, and worse than you feared. I stood in the bridal suite 20 minutes before the ceremony clutching a manila envelope thick with truth. Lauren's eyes were wide, frightened, but she still believed, had to believe, that love could fix anything. Read this tonight, I begged her. After the toasts. Lock your door. Call me and I'll come get you. I swear on Daniel's grave. Marlene walked in like she owned the air itself. She snatched the envelope, flipped it open, and her face went the color of old bone. Brandon, she shrieked. My son appeared in the doorway, already dressed, cufflinks glinting like tiny knives. He looked at me the way you look at a stock you're about to short. Cold, clinical, already counting the profit in the fall. Take her to the ballroom, Marlene ordered. And keep her quiet. He gripped my upper arm so hard I felt the bruises bloom instantly. As he marched me down the marble hallway he whispered, "You're embarrassing yourself, Mother. And you're embarrassing me." I looked up at him. At the perfect part in his hair. The knot in his tie centered exactly. And I said the first honest thing I'd said to him in months. "No, Brandon. You're embarrassing yourself. And today everyone's going to see it." He smiled then. Thin and sharp. "You have no idea what you're up against, old woman." But he was wrong. I knew exactly what I was up against. I had spent 74 years learning patience the way other women learn French. Slowly, painfully, and with perfect pronunciation. And patience, like lace, is strongest when you can't see the threads. The ceremony itself was flawless. The way only money can make things flawless. White peonies the size of dinner plates spilled from the chancel. A 12-piece string ensemble played Pachelbel like they were being paid by the tier. Lauren floated down the aisle on Doug's unsteady arm. He'd started drinking at 10 a.m. to steady the nerves, he said. She looked like a bride on a wedding cake. Except her eyes kept flicking to me in the front pew. Wide, frightened, begging me to still be wrong. Brandon never looked at me once. He stared at Lauren the way a man stares at a winning lottery ticket he's about to cash. I sat with my beaded clutch in my lap. The one I'd carried to my own wedding in 1973. Inside it was the flash drive sewn into the lining with 32 stitches of upholstery thread. I counted them every night while I prayed. 32 stitches. 32 pieces of Judas. The minister, somebody famous from a megachurch in Columbus, spoke about love being patient, love being kind. I wanted to stand up and laugh. Or scream. Or both. Instead I folded my hands the way my mother taught me and waited. Patience. Ruth, patience is a weapon when everything else has been taken from you. They kissed. Rice. Cold. Celebratory rice. Showered over them. Cameras flashed. Someone opened the French doors to the terrace and spring air rushed in, carrying the scent of lilacs and lies. Then came the receiving line. I stood at the end, after the cousins and the college friends and the private equity partners who all looked like they'd been printed from the same catalog. When Brandon finally reached me, he offered the same cheek he used to press against my apron when he came home from kindergarten, smelling of paste and crayons. I kissed it anyway. He tasted like expensive cologne and betrayal. Marlene was next. She air-kissed somewhere near my scorched cheek and whispered, "Try anything and I'll have you removed for elder abuse. I have friends who owe me favors." I smiled the small, polite smile I use when a customer tries to haggle over a quarter yard of broadcloth. "Enjoy your dinner, Marlene," I said. "It's the last one you'll eat as a free woman." Her eyes narrowed, but the line was moving. She had no time to snarl. The ballroom glittered like the inside of a jewelry box. Round tables draped in ivory silk. Centerpieces so tall you couldn't see the person across from you. Perfect for secrets. I was seated at table 12, near the kitchen doors, with Lauren's great-aunt from Toledo who was deaf in one ear and Brandon's old Little League coach, who kept calling me, "Ma'am," and asking if I needed more water. I waited until the entrees were served. Filet mignon for the carnivores, some kind of squash blossom for the vegans, and the champagne had loosened tongues and lowered guards. Then I slipped the young DJ a folded $100 bill and the flash drive. "Play it when the father-daughter dance is supposed to start," I told him. No announcement. Just dim the lights and hit play. He looked barely 20. Hair bleached white at the tips. Nervous. "Ma'am, if this is, like, revenge porn or something." Quote, "It's the opposite of revenge, sweetheart," I said. "It's rescue." He nodded, unsure, but the 100 disappeared into his pocket. I went back to my seat and folded my hands again. Across the room, Brandon raised a glass to toast his new bride. His voice carried over the clink of silverware. "To Lauren, my beautiful wife, my future, my everything." He said everything the way another man might say, "Jackpot." Lauren blushed and sipped her champagne. Doug was already asleep with his face in his tiramisu. The string quartet packed up. The DJ took the stage. The lights dimmed to a romantic amber. This was it. The first slide appeared on the 4 giant screens that had been set up for the childhood photo montage. Only it wasn't Brandon on a big wheel or Lauren losing her front teeth. It was page 1 of Eleanor Whitmore's True Codicil, dated 3 weeks before she died. Should my granddaughter Lauren Elizabeth Whitmore predecease her 35th birthday after entering into lawful marriage, the entirety of my estate shall pass immediately and without restriction to her surviving spouse. A murmur rippled through the room like wind through dry corn. The next slide. The $2 million life insurance policy taken out on Lauren 6 weeks ago. Beneficiary: Brandon Matthew Callahan. Then another. A grainy still from the security camera at the lake house showing Brandon and Marlene on the dock. At midnight, Marlene handing him a small brown bottle. I had paid a private investigator, a retired Dayton detective with arthritis and a soft spot for widows, to install that camera. Cost me nearly all the shop's Christmas profits. Worth every penny. The room went from murmur to roar. Lauren stood up so fast her chair crashed backward. "Brandon?" Quote. He was already moving, trying to get to the DJ booth. But half the groomsmen were ex-fraternity brothers who'd played lacrosse. They blocked him without even knowing why yet. Slide after slide. Audio now. My own voice. Thin but steady. From the night I'd recorded them on the balcony. Roofies dissolve clean in champagne. By the time anyone finds her floating, the lake will have washed everything away. And if the fall down the stairs doesn't work, there's always carbon monoxide in the boathouse. Old houses. Old heaters. Tragic. Someone screamed. I think it was Lauren's maid of honor. Marlene bolted for the side exit, heels clattering. But two off-duty Cincinnati cops I'd hired with what was left of my savings were already there in rented tuxedos. They caught her like linebackers sacking a quarterback. Brandon tried a different tactic. My mother has early onset dementia, he announced. This is elder abuse. That was when I stood up. Brandon Matthew Callahan, I said. I have never been more clear-headed in my life. I have given everything to Detective Ramirez of the Cincinnati Police. Pandemonium. You crazy old bitch, he spat. No, sweetheart, I said. I just saved a girl's life. And maybe, somewhere down the road, what's left of your soul. They cuffed him between the Viennese dessert table and the ice sculpture shaped like a swan. Lauren fell into my arms. I almost died, she whispered. No, baby, I whispered back. You almost lived someone else's lie. Now you get to live your own truth. And for the first time since the night I found them on that couch, I cried. Not for the burns on my face. For the little boy who used to fall asleep on my chest listening to my heartbeat. And who somehow learned to sell his soul $800,000 at a time.
They took Brandon and Marlene out the service entrance so the photographers wouldn't get the money shots. I watched from the terrace doors while Lauren clung to my arm like a child waking from a nightmare. The April night smelled of wet grass and ruined orchids. Red and blue lights strobed across the manicured hedges as the cruisers pulled away. Lauren's teeth were chattering. Shock does that. I took off my little lace jacket. The one I'd worn to my own wedding reception 51 years ago. And draped it around her bare shoulders. Come on, honey, I said. Let's get you out of that dress before it chokes the life out of you. She laughed then. A cracked sound. And let me lead her back inside. The ballroom looked like a bomb had gone off in a Neiman Marcus. Purses abandoned. Shoes kicked off mid-sprint. Half-eaten filet cooling under overturned chairs. The swan ice sculpture had completely collapsed. Someone's stiletto heel stuck out of its neck like an arrow. We found the bridal suite. I locked the door behind us and started unfastening the 100 silk-covered buttons down Lauren's back while she stared at herself in the mirror. I married him, she whispered. I said forever to a man who was measuring my coffin. The dress pulled at her feet like melted cream. I helped her into one of the hotel bathrobes. She looked 12 years old. I sat her down on the velvet settee and knelt. Bad knees and all. So we were eye to eye. Listen to me, Lauren Elizabeth. You did not marry him. You married a lie wearing his face. The marriage is already dead. Tomorrow we'll annul it faster than you can say fraud. Tonight you are safe. And tomorrow you will be free. She searched my face. How can you be so calm? He's your son. I thought about that for a long second. Because I buried my son the night I found them planning your murder, I said. What they dragged out of here tonight was just the shell that used to hold him. She started crying again. Quieter this time. I held her until the tears soaked through my blouse. Eventually Detective Ramirez knocked. He looked embarrassed to be interrupting two women in bathrobes. Mrs. Callahan, we'll need your formal statement tonight. And Miss Whitmore. Well, Mrs. Callahan, I guess we have questions for you too. Lauren flinched at the name. Not for long, I told him. But we'll come. Give us 20 minutes. He nodded and closed the door. That was when Lauren reached into the little beaded purse still dangling from her wrist and pulled out a second flash drive. Silver. Smaller than mine. I wasn't completely honest with you, she said. Voice trembling. Grandma Eleanor taught me better than to trust anyone with everything. She handed it to me. I've been recording my mother for 2 years, she said. Ever since I found out the tanning salons were laundering money for the Colombos. I thought it was just tax stuff. Then 6 months ago I heard her on the phone talking about getting rid of loose ends before the wedding. I didn't know the loose end was me. My hand closed around the drive like it was a live thing. Lauren, why didn't you come to me sooner? Quote, because I thought if I married Brandon, I could protect myself with prenups and cameras and I thought he loved me. Her voice cracked on the last word. I was so stupid. No, I said fiercely. You were 27 and scared and trying to save the only family you had left. That's not stupid. That's human. I slipped her drive into my brassiere next to my own. 2 widows' hearts beating against evidence. We gave our statements until 3 in the morning. Lauren fell asleep on a couch in the detective bureau, still wearing the hotel bathrobe. I covered her with my jacket again and sat beside her, guarding her dreams the way I once guarded Brandon's. At dawn they let us go home. My home. Not the Whitmore mansion. I made cocoa the way my mother made it. Whole milk. Real vanilla. A pinch of salt. And put Lauren to bed in the room that used to be Brandon's. His high school trophies were still on the shelf. She touched the little gold baseball player and started crying again. I took the trophies down, wrapped them in newspaper, and carried them to the garage. Some things a girl should never have to wake up to. 3 days later the first twist came. I was in the shop restocking Rick Rack when my cell phone rang. The senior-friendly one Brandon had bought me. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. Mother. His voice. Flat and cold. Like all the warmth had been wrung out of it in a holding cell. Brandon. You think you won, he said. You think you saved the day. But you just made yourself the perfect suspect. I gripped the counter. What are you talking about? Quote, check your porch. I walked to the front window. A manila envelope sat on the welcome mat. No stamp. No address. Just my name in Brandon's neat architectural handwriting. Inside. Photographs. Me. In my Buick. Parked outside the Whitmore house at 2:14 a.m. 3 weeks ago. Me. Handing an envelope to the retired detective in a Kroger parking lot. Me. Buying a prepaid phone at Walmart with cash. And worst. Printed in red block letters across the bottom photo. Ruth Ann Callahan hired private investigator to plant evidence against son and fiancé. Motive. Dementia-induced paranoia and jealousy. My knees buckled. I had to sit on the bolt stool. Brandon's voice purred through the phone. I have a new lawyer. Mother. Very expensive. Very creative. By the time he's done, you'll be the crazy one who framed her own child. Elder abuse. Harassment. Maybe even attempted murder for hire. Lauren's testimony will seal it. She's terrified of you now. By the way, you'll die in prison. And when you do, I'll still get the money. Because Grandma Eleanor's will had one more clause nobody found yet. I couldn't breathe. Checkmate, he whispered. And hung up. I sat there for a long time. Rick Rack spools rolling across the floor like multicolored coins. Then I did what any 74-year-old woman does when the devil himself calls to gloat. I called the one person I swore I'd never involve. I called my sister. Dolores. Dolores is 76. Mean as a snake with hemorrhoids. And the best criminal defense paralegal Dayton ever lost to retirement. She hates me. Has since 1968 when I married Daniel instead of letting her have him. But blood is blood. She answered on the first ring. What do you want? Ruthie. Quote, I need you to come to the house tonight, I said. Bring your old courthouse contacts and a bottle of the good bourbon. My son just declared war. And I'm about to show him what scorched earth really looks like. I hung up before she could refuse. Because Brandon had forgotten one thing. He learned greed from watching television. I learned survival in a steel town where widows ate pride for breakfast and still managed to keep the lights on. He wanted to play dirty? Fine. I had spent 50 years being the good one. It was time to remind the world that nice and harmless are not the same thing.
Dolores arrived at 7:30 sharp, still wearing the same scowl she'd perfected in 1972. She carried a brown legal envelope under one arm and a bottle of Blanton's in the other. Her hair was the color of steel wool dyed midnight blue, and she smelled like Virginia Slims and righteous indignation. "You look like hell, Ruthie," she said by way of greeting. "I feel worse," I answered, and stepped aside so she could come in. Lauren was asleep upstairs. I'd given her one of my old nightgowns and half a sleeping pill from the bottle the doctor prescribed after Daniel died. She needed the rest. Tomorrow would be brutal. Dolores set the bourbon on the kitchen table like she was laying down a gauntlet. "Start talking," she said. "And don't leave out the part where your precious boy tries to frame you for felony conspiracy." So I told her everything. The rice on my face. The flash drives. The secret codicil. The photographs delivered to my porch. Brandon's voice on the phone dripping with victory. When I finished, Dolores poured 2 fingers of bourbon into jelly glasses and slid one across the table. "He's dumber than I ever gave him credit for," she said, swirling the amber liquid. "Also meaner. That's a dangerous combination." I sipped. It burned all the way down. A cleaner burn than the rice. "What's in the envelope?" I asked. She opened it and spread the contents like a poker hand. First, the real will. She tapped a thick document stamped in red. "Probate court, confidential. Eleanor Whitmore filed this 2 days before she died. Nobody knew because she paid the clerk $5,000 cash to keep it sealed until Lauren either married or turned 30. Turns out Grandma didn't trust anybody. Not Marlene. Not Doug. And definitely not any future son-in-law. If Lauren marries under duress or dies suspiciously within 5 years of the wedding, the entire estate rolls over to a charitable trust for abused women. Brandon gets nothing. Ever. Not 1 red cent. I stared at the pages until the words blurred. Second, Dolores continued, sliding over a thinner sheaf. "The insurance policies? Void. Lauren signed them. But Eleanor's trust had a clause forbidding any beneficiary from insuring her life without written permission from the trustee. Guess who the trustee was? Eleanor herself. And then a law firm in Cleveland that hates the Whitmores with biblical passion. They've already filed fraud claims." I felt the first real spark of hope in weeks. Third, Dolores said, and her voice dropped to the register she used to use when court was about to go sideways. "Brandon's fancy new lawyer? Gregory Allen Pierce? Disbarred in Kentucky 2 years ago for bribing a judge. Currently under federal indictment for laundering money through a chain of northern Kentucky strip clubs. The Columbos. Yes, those Columbos. Own 49% of those clubs. Guess who's about to flip on Brandon to save his own hide?" Quote, I set my glass down carefully. "You're telling me my son hired a mob lawyer who's getting ready to sell him for a plea deal?" "I'm telling you your son hired a dead man walking," Dolores said. Pierce recorded every conversation. The U.S. Attorney's Office has been listening to Brandon brag about framing his own mother for 3 days now. They're just waiting for the grand jury indictment to drop tomorrow morning. If my source is still breathing. Quote, I closed my eyes. The room smelled like bourbon and old linoleum and something that might have been salvation. "There's one more thing," Dolores said quietly. She pulled out a single photograph. It was me, 74 years old, standing in my nightgown on the back porch at 3:17 a.m. last week, pouring something from a small glass bottle into the koi pond Daniel and I had dug the summer. Brandon was 10. The bottle was unlabeled. The liquid was clear. Dolores's eyes were soft for once. Care to explain, Ruthie? Quote, I looked at the picture a long time. I was going to tell you, I said finally. I needed insurance nobody else could find. Poison? She asked. Digitalis. From the foxglove I grow along the fence. Enough in that bottle to stop a horse's heart in 4 minutes. My voice didn't shake. I brewed it the night I found them on the couch. I told myself if they hurt Lauren, if the law failed, I would do it myself. Old lady tea with a permanent kind of sleep. Dolores didn't flinch. And the pond? Quote, I couldn't keep it in the house. Every time I looked at it I saw Brandon's face the day he learned to ride a two-wheeler. So I killed the fish instead. I laughed. A dry sound. Turns out even my fish got mercy my son never earned. Dolores reached across the table and took my hand. You're not going to need it, Ruthie, she said. Brandon's going down hard. And he's taking Marlene with him. But you destroy every trace of that foxglove. Burn the plants. Bleach the bottle. Because if the prosecutors ever find it, they'll use it to paint you exactly the way Brandon wants. Crazy. Dangerous. Capable of anything. I nodded. We sat in silence until the bourbon was gone. Upstairs. Lauren stirred and called out in her sleep. I went to her. She was tangled in the sheets. Sweating. Murmuring Brandon's name like a prayer gone wrong. You're safe, baby. Mama's here. She quieted. When I came back downstairs, Dolores was washing the jelly glasses. One last piece, she said. Lauren's been offered witness protection. New name. New state. The whole deal. She's thinking of taking it. I felt the floor tilt. She's leaving? Quote, she's terrified. Ruthie. Of Marlene's people. Of the press. Of waking up every morning wondering if someone's still coming for the money. Tell her I'll keep the porch light on until I die. Dolores nodded once. Then she left, taking the empty bottle and the photograph with her. I went out to the backyard in the cold April dark and dug up every foxglove plant with my bare hands. The roots came up wet and smelling of earth and guilt. I carried them to the burn barrel, poured lighter fluid over them, and struck the match. The flames were blue at first, then hungry orange. I watched until there was nothing left but ash. And somewhere in the county jail, my son was learning that some fires start small and quiet, lit by an old woman's trembling hands in the middle of the night. You think it ends with handcuffs and ashes. It doesn't. It ends with a thunderstorm over Lake Erie and 2 women who finally stop being polite. 3 weeks after the wedding that wasn't, the federal indictment dropped like summer lightning. Brandon Matthew Callahan, Marlene Whitmore, Gregory Allen Pierce, and 4 Columbos were all named in a 118-count RICO masterpiece. The newspapers called it the tanning bed takedown. I called it Tuesday. Lauren vanished the same week. One morning her bed was made. A note on the pillow in her neat Catholic school handwriting. Mom Ruth, I have to learn how to breathe without being afraid. I'll come back when I remember how. Keep the lake key under the blue pot. I love you bigger than the sky. I cried once. Hard. Into the pillow that still smelled like her coconut shampoo. Then I ironed handkerchiefs until my eyes stopped leaking. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. On the first Friday in June, a collect call came from the Hamilton County Justice Center. Ruth Ann Callahan. Will you accept charges from inmate Brandon Callahan? Quote, my hand shook so badly I almost dropped the receiver. Put him through. Silence. Then that voice I once sang lullabies to. Mother. Flat. No warmth. No shame. Just a blade looking for soft tissue. I'm not doing this with you. Brandon. You'll want to hear this one. Bring the Buick. Come alone. Midnight tomorrow. The visitor parking lot. If you don't, Lauren dies before sunrise Sunday. He hung up. I stood in my kitchen with the dead phone in my hand and felt every year of my age settle on my shoulders like wet wool. I did the only thing I could think of. I called Dolores. She answered with a mouth full of cheesecake. What now, Ruthie? Quote, he says he'll kill Lauren if I don't come alone tomorrow night. Dolores was quiet for 5 full seconds. Trap, she said finally. Classic jailhouse bluff. Maybe. But what if it isn't? Quote, another silence. Then we stop playing nice, she said. Meet me at the shop in 20 minutes. Bring black clothes and the .38 Daniel kept in the flour tin. I hadn't touched that gun since 1983. I touched it now. Saturday night. A storm crawled across Ohio like a wounded animal. Heat lightning stitched the horizon. Dolores and I sat in my darkened shop among bolts of midnight silk and listened to the thunder argue with itself. At 11:03 p.m. my cell buzzed. Change of plans, Brandon's voice said. Drive to the lake house. Come inside. Leave your phone in the car. If I see cops. If I see anyone. She bleeds out in the boathouse. Dolores's eyes glittered. He thinks you're still the woman who apologizes when someone steps on her foot, she said. Let's show him what happens when that woman runs out of sorry. We drove north in tandem. Rain slashed the windshield so hard the wipers screamed. The lake house loomed in the lightning. One window glowed. I left the phone, took the gun, and stepped into the rain. Inside smelled of wet cedar and something metallic. Upstairs. Mother. Lauren was there, duct taped to a chair. A red laser dot trembled on her forehead. Brandon stepped into the light in an orange jumpsuit. Here's how this goes, he said. You sign a confession. Then you die. Lauren watches. I reached into my pocket. Digitalis, I said softly. Exactly. Lightning flashed. In that flash I saw Dolores behind him with the rifle. Actually, I said, I brought something stronger. I threw the bottle. Dolores fired. The roar filled the room. Brandon fell. Lauren screamed. I cut her free. Dolores kicked the gun away. Sirens wailed. You shot me, Brandon whispered. No, baby, I said. I finally stopped protecting you from the consequences of being you. Outside, the storm washed the night clean. Almost over. One more truth left to burn. The ambulance took Brandon away with a deputy riding shotgun and Dolores's bullet still lodged in his shoulder. Lauren and I stood barefoot on the wet dock while the rain turned gentle. The kind of summer rain that smells like forgiveness even when none is deserved. She leaned her head against my arm. I thought I was going to die in that chair, she whispered. You didn't, I answered. And you never will again because somebody else decided your life was worth money. That part is finished. Detective Ramirez tried to separate us for statements. I simply took Lauren's hand and said, we'll talk together or not at all. He looked at 2 soaked, exhausted women who had just survived a nightmare and wisely chose together. They let us sit in the kitchen where Eleanor used to make cinnamon toast at midnight. The same table where Lauren learned to write her name in cursive. I wrapped us both in quilts that smelled of cedar and old summers. Someone brought coffee that tasted like mercy. Lauren told them everything. How Brandon had texted her from a smuggled phone. Promised he could make the charges disappear if she came to the lake house alone. How he'd grabbed her in the boathouse before she could scream. I told them the rest. The pills he wanted me to swallow. The forged confession. The moment I finally understood that love sometimes means pulling a trigger you never thought you'd touch. Ramirez closed his notebook. Self-defense. Kidnapping. Attempted murder. Escape from custody. Your son won't see daylight outside a prison wall until he's older than you are now. Mrs. Callahan. I nodded once. The words should have broken me. Instead, they felt like the last stitch in a hem that had been unraveling for years. Dawn crept pink over the water when they finally let us leave. Dolores drove us back to Dayton in the Eldorado with the windows down and gospel music turned up, loud enough to scare the devil himself. 2 weeks later, the final twist arrived. Quiet as a letter slipped under a door. I was in the shop, cutting lilac cotton for a baby quilt, when the bell jingled and Lauren walked in wearing jeans and a smile I had never seen on her before. Wide, unafraid, hers. She carried a thick envelope. "Sit down, Mom Ruth," she said, and for once her voice didn't tremble. Inside the envelope, the original, unsealed, never before filed codicil to Eleanor Whitmore's will. The one Eleanor had hidden inside the lining of her childhood doll and told only one person about. On her deathbed, that person had been Lauren. Eleanor had left everything. The lake house, the trusts, the mineral rights, every dime, to a foundation whose sole trustee would be Lauren Elizabeth Whitmore, and whose board of directors would include one additional member for life. Ruth Ann Callahan. There was a second page, handwritten in Eleanor's spidery script. To Ruth, you remind me of my own mother. Soft voice, steel spine. If my granddaughter is ever in danger, trust the woman who measures the world in quarter yards and still makes beauty out of scraps. She will know what to do with love when it has been weaponized. Thank you for being the mother my daughter never was. Eleanor. I cried then. Not pretty tears. Ugly, shoulder-shaking sobs that scared the cat in the window. Lauren held me the way I had once held her, until the storm inside passed. That afternoon we closed the shop early, drove to the cemetery, and laid lilacs on Eleanor's grave. Then we went to the women's prison in Marysville where Marlene was being held pending trial. I had one thing left to say. She shuffled into the visiting room in orange, hair dyed a brassy gold that did her no favors. The smirk was gone. In its place was something small and gray. I didn't sit. I'm not here for forgiveness, I told her through the glass. I'm here to tell you what happens next. The foundation Lauren and I run? First thing we funded was a safe house for women whose husbands try to kill them for insurance money. We named the garden after you. The Marlene Whitmore Memorial Foxglove Bed. Every bloom is poisonous. Every bloom is beautiful. Every bloom reminds them they can choose to be deadly or they can choose to be free. Marlene opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I stood up. You taught me a mother will do anything to protect her child. You just never understood which one of us was the child. I never went back. Years slipped by the way quilt blocks do. Lauren kept the lake house and turned the boathouse into a writing studio. She published a novel under a pen name about a girl who survives her own murder plot. It stayed on the bestseller list for 72 weeks. She sent the first copy to Brandon in prison with a one-line inscription. You were the villain. She was the author all along. I kept the shop. At 81 I still cut fabric straighter than most girls half my age. On quiet afternoons I teach quilting classes to women from the safe house. They come in timid, eyes down, carrying scars you can't see. They leave with a finished quilt top and the knowledge that broken things can be pieced into something stronger than they ever were whole. Brandon writes letters sometimes. He is up for parole in 2041. He encloses tiny squares of fabric he's pieced into blocks. They are perfect. I keep them in a shoebox on the top shelf of the closet and never answer. Some stories don't get redemption. Some sons don't come home. And some mothers learn to live with the hole where a heart used to be. Last month Lauren and I drove up to the lake for the 4th of July. We sat on the dock at twilight drinking sweet tea from jelly glasses and watching fireworks bloom over the water. Do you ever wish it had turned out differently? She asked. Every day, I said. And not for 1 second. Because here's the final stitch. I lost my son the moment he decided a girl's life was a price tag. But I gained a daughter the moment I decided her life was priceless. Some things are poisonous only if you swallow them. The rest of the time they're just flowers doing their best to survive the same dirt that tried to kill them. I pick one bloom, tuck it behind my ear, and go back inside. The shop bell jingles. Another woman walks in carrying pieces. I smile, hand her scissors, and begin. Because that's what mothers do. We keep piecing beauty out of pain. One careful quarter-inch seam at a time. Until the day we lay the last quilt over our own shoulders and finally rest.